I knew it, I knew it, I knew it, I knew it. Back in 2011, then Greek Prime Minister George Papandreou proposed to hold a nationwide referendum on whether the country should accept the bailout package that was being offered to it by the EU at that time, and all the austerity strings that would have come attached with it. Now, unsurprisingly, the heavy hitters in the EU, particularly Germany, pressured Papandreou to drop the referendum idea, and he did. And at the time I said, something's got to give. Sooner or later, they're going to have to confront this issue again. There's going to be a need for another bailout, and at that point, they may not be able to avoid a referendum. Well, the prediction has now come true. Current Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras has committed, and his parliament has voted, to hold a popular nationwide referendum on whether to accept the current bailout package that's being offered to Greece by the EU, the IMF, and the European Central Bank, the ECB. Supposedly this referendum will take place on July 5th, if I remember correctly. You know, honestly, I think this is a good thing. Whether Greeks choose to accept the bailout package or reject it. Either way, this is a good thing. I think it's necessary and I think it's proper. The reason is that ultimately the main responsibility for the position that Greece's government is in right now lies with the government of Greece itself, as well as the people of Greece. Now, the people of Greece over the years have continually elected spendthrift governments that have offered, or at least sought to offer them, generous social programs and lavish compensation for their public sector workers without raising the country's taxes high enough to carry the burden on their own. As so many governments do, they relied on borrowing to cover up the shortfall. But of course, the global economic crisis that began late in the last decade obviously caused tax receipts to plummet, and that left the country, to put it mildly, in a very unenviable fiscal and monetary position. And so that is one of the major contributors to the ongoing Grexit crisis that both Greece and the EU are facing right now. So what's to be done about it? The EU, the IMF, and the ECB have come up with this bailout package, but of course there are a lot of strings attached, and those strings amount to various forms of what can fairly be called austerity. Basically, it's belt-tightening time in Greece. The Greek government has got to get its fiscal act together if it hopes to remain part of the European Union and the Eurozone. Now, of course, these austerity measures are very unpopular, by and large, with the people of Greece. That's not surprising. But at the same time, what I think needs to be acknowledged is that, you know, governments elected by the people of Greece got the country into this mess. And so I think the people of Greece bear a substantial portion of the responsibility for this mess. That is why I think this referendum is exactly the right way to go. Now, I remember the last time around in 2011, there was a lot of talk from many members of Greek society who were opposed to austerity that these strings attached to the bailout package were basically being forced down the Greek people's throats. Now, it's easy to make that claim when the bailout package is accepted by the Greek government over the objections of the people of the country. That's why I think a referendum is what's needed here, to break this logjam. The Greek people themselves should be the ones to decide whether the government ends up acquiescing in these austerity measures or not. Now, this is partly because, you know, it's a matter of democratic legitimacy. The people of Greece should be the ones, you know, to make the decision. The government should govern in a way that's in accordance with the wishes of a majority of the population. However, there's another consideration that should be taken into account. Now, this is an argument that I heard made by the late former chairman of the Cato Institute, libertarian think tank in Washington, D.C., where I used to intern. His name was William Niskanen, and he argued that when it comes to cutting government down to size, the method that's often been advocated by conservatives in American politics, which is known as starve the beast, simply doesn't work. The idea is cut taxes to reduce the amount of revenue that the government collects, and then supposedly the government will be forced to cut spending as a result. Of course, that's complete nonsense, because what do governments do? They simply borrow money to make up the budget shortfall, and of course that ends up dramatically increasing the national debt. And anytime the government has difficulty servicing some of the debt it already has, it simply borrows more money from other sources to pay off its current debts. It would be like if an individual who's maxed out his credit cards and can't make his payments were to take out another line of credit from a different bank and use that borrowed money to pay off the old debt. So you're incurring new debt to cover the old debt. Of course, in the long run, that's not really sustainable. So what Mr. Niskanen advocated was a different strategy called serve the check. Instead of trying to starve the beast, which plainly doesn't work, you serve the check. What that means is, if the people, the electorate, is demanding more government spending in any form, then raise taxes accordingly. Raise taxes to cover that additional spending, and let taxpayers themselves see up close and personal the true cost of the social spending, the lavish social spending that they demand. If they really want, a more generous welfare state or higher levels of public spending generally, let them have it, but let them pay the price for it. Serve the check. Let them see the cost of the policies for which they're voting, and then they can make a much better informed decision as to whether they really support those policies or not. Let the people understand experientially that there is no such thing as a free lunch. That is exactly the method that I think the EU should take towards Greece. Let the Greek people recognize the cost of the policies that so many of them have supported over the years and over the decades. Let them see the consequences of the policies for which they vote. Now, they can either accept the bailout package and all of the austerity strings that come attached to it, or they can reject the bailout package and let their government figure things out on its own. Let them figure their own way out of fiscal and economic ruin. That's the name of the game. Either way, I suspect some form of austerity will be necessary. I mean, with Greek banks closing down today and all of this other nonsense going on, I don't see how there can be any way out of this crisis that doesn't involve some substantial degree of austerity. Spending cuts and tax increases are probably going to have to be part of that mix, whether Greece accepts the bailout package or not. I suspect it'll probably feel a lot more pain without it, if it tries to claw its way out of this ditch that it's dug for itself on its own. But the bottom line is, the Greek people and their elected representatives made their bed. Now let them sleep in it. Either way, let them deal with the consequences of the policies they supported over the years. But let it happen in a way that clearly parks responsibility for that choice at the doorstep of the Greek people themselves. Don't force a bailout on them without their consent. Not only is that undemocratic, but it also enables opponents of austerity in Greece to claim that the whole thing is being forced on them against their will and is unjust simply for that reason. It allows them to duck responsibility for the fiscal profligacy that landed them in this position in the first place, or at least that did so much to help land them in this position. That's the problem. A referendum will clearly show that whatever happens afterward is the responsibility of the Greek people themselves. They won't be able to avoid that responsibility. They won't be able to blame all their problems on the EU or on austerity or on capitalism or any of that nonsense. They'll recognize that they made their bed and they're sleeping in it, whatever that bed may be. I think that is the right way to deal both with this crisis and with other crises of this same nature. Let people recognize and deal with the consequences of the votes that they cast. Serve the check. That's my take. Looking forward to the discussion, as always. Peace out.